The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the small town of Willow Creek. Emily sat on the porch of her family's old homestead, her feet dangling in the air as she gently swayed to the rhythm of the crickets. It was a routine she had grown accustomed to over the years, a time for reflection and prayer. For 7 years, she had prayed every night, asking for a miracle, a chance to escape the mundane life that had been laid out before her. Her prayers, it seemed, had gone unanswered, leaving her with a sense of longing that echoed deep within her soul. Each morning she woke to the same chores, the same view of the prairie stretching to the mountains, the same conversations about the weather and the price of grain. The sameness felt like a weight, and each night she would ask for a door, any door, to open. As she sat there, lost in thought, a figure emerged from the darkness. He was a tall, lanky man with a strong jaw and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. A wide-brimmed hat sat atop his head, and a worn leather duster coat hung from his shoulders, giving him the appearance of a man who had been riding the range for some time. Emily's heart skipped a beat as their eyes met, and she felt an inexplicable jolt run through her. The stranger tipped his hat in her direction, his eyes never leaving hers. "Howdy, ma'am," he said, his deep voice low and smooth. "My name's Jack. I'm just passing through town. Mind if I join you on the porch?" Emily hesitated for a moment, her fingers tightening on the edge of the wooden slats. There was a story in the dust on his boots and a quiet weariness in his stance, but there was something about Jack's easy demeanor that put her at ease. She nodded, moving her simple cotton skirt aside to make room. Jack sat down beside her, his long legs stretching out before him, the spurs on his boots giving a soft clink. They sat in silence for a time, watching as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky. The air smelled of dry earth and the sweet hay stored in the barn. "I saw you from the road," Jack said after a while, his voice quiet. "Looked like you were carrying the whole world on your shoulders." Emily glanced at him, surprised. No one in town ever spoke to her like that. They spoke of chores and prospects and the latest gossip from the mercantile. "Just thinking," she replied, her own voice softer than she intended, "about how some doors never seem to open." Jack nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. He didn't press for more, and that silence felt like a gift. As they sat there, the sound of music drifted from the town square, the lively notes of a fiddle and the thump of a bass carried on the evening breeze. Jack's eyes sparkled with amusement, and he turned to Emily with a grin that softened the hard lines of his face. "Sounds like the folks in town are having themselves a time," he said. He stood up and brushed the dust from his trousers. "You care to join me for a dance?" Emily's breath caught. She hadn't danced in years. The suggestion felt dangerous and wonderful all at once. She looked down at her work-worn hands, then back at his offered palm. It was broad and calloused, a working man's hand. She placed her hand in his. A current, warm and startling, traveled up her arm. He helped her to her feet, and for a moment they stood there on the creaky porch boards, the music winding its way toward them. She knew, with a certainty that anchored itself in her bones, that her life was about to change. As they walked toward the distant glow of lanterns in the square, she felt the eyes of the town upon them. Curtains twitched in windows. Old Mrs. Henderson paused her rocking on her own porch, her knitting needles going still. The miller's sons, loitering by the water trough, stopped their chatter to watch. Their faces held curiosity, suspicion, and a plain surprise that this quiet Emily was walking with a stranger. She didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the path ahead, her hand still in Jack's, and for the first time in 7 years, the weight was gone. She was walking toward an answer, not just praying for one. The music grew louder, wrapping around them as they disappeared into the crowd, 2 figures stepping out of the lonely dark and into the light. Margaret had been praying for 7 years. Not the kind of prayer you say before supper with your head bowed and your hands folded. The kind you whisper into your pillow at night when the house is dark and the only sound is the wind scratching at the window like it wants to come in. The kind where you stop asking for things and start asking if anyone is even listening. She was 24 now, which meant she had started at 17, right after her mother passed. The fever had taken her quick, 3 days from the first cough to the last breath, and Margaret had learned something in those 72 hours that she had never been able to unlearn. Prayer did not always get an answer. Sometimes it just hung there in the air, unanswered, like smoke from a fire that had already gone cold. Willow Creek had not changed much in those 7 years. The same wooden storefronts along Main Street, the same church bell that rang every Sunday at 10, the same faces at the same windows, watching the same dust blow down the same road. Margaret worked at the general store now, measuring flour and sugar into paper sacks, threading needles for women who could not see the eye anymore, listening to gossip she had heard 100 times before. It was a good life, a safe life, a life that fit her like a dress that had been sewn for someone else. Then the drifter cowboy came to town. His name was Jack, or at least that was what he told people. He had ridden in on a bay mare with a limp in her front leg, leading a pack mule that looked older than the hills. He had asked the blacksmith if there was work for a man who knew his way around horses and was not afraid of honest sweat. The blacksmith had pointed toward the livery stable, and Jack had been there ever since, 3 weeks now, sleeping in the loft and eating his meals at the boarding house. Margaret had seen him before. You could not live in a town the size of Willow Creek and not see everyone who passed through. She had watched him from behind the counter of the general store, watched him buy tobacco and coffee and a new pair of work gloves. She had noticed the way he took his hat off when he came through the door, the way he said thank you to old Mr. Henderson like he meant it, the way his eyes moved slow and careful over everything, like he was memorizing a map he would never get to use again. She had also noticed the way the town looked at him, the way women pulled their shawls tighter when he passed, the way men stood a little straighter, their hands resting near their belts. Strangers were not welcome in Willow Creek. They were tolerated, watched, measured. And Jack was being measured every day. The Saturday gathering was held in the town square, between the church and the post office. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between the trees, casting yellow light on the faces of the people who had come to forget, for a few hours, how hard their lives were. There was a fiddle player, a man named Ezra who had lost 2 fingers in a threshing accident but could still make the bow sing. There was a woman who played the upright piano that had been hauled across the prairie in a wagon 40 years ago. There was lemonade and pie, and the kind of laughter that came from people who knew each other too well to pretend. Margaret stood near the edge of the crowd, a cup of lemonade in her hand that she had not taken a sip from in 10 minutes. She was watching Jack. He was leaning against the hitching post outside the livery, his arms crossed, his hat pulled low. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the dancers, at the way they moved, at the way the dust rose from their boots and hung in the lantern light like gold. She had prayed for 7 years. She had prayed for meaning, for purpose, for a sign that her life was not just a series of days that would end the same way they had started. She had prayed for her mother to come back, and when that did not happen, she had prayed for the strength to go on without her. She had prayed for the loneliness to lift, for the silence in her house to feel less like a tomb and more like a sanctuary. And now, standing in the yellow light of the lanterns, watching a drifter cowboy who had no reason to stay and every reason to leave, she felt something shift. Not a voice from heaven, not a bolt of lightning, just a small, quiet certainty that had been there all along, waiting for her to notice. The fiddle player launched into a new tune, faster than the last, and the dancers clapped and stomped and spun. Jack pushed himself off the hitching post and started walking toward the crowd. Not toward the dance floor, toward her. Margaret's hand tightened around her cup. She had prayed for 7 years. She had never once considered what it would feel like if the answer walked right up to her and asked her to dance. As the sun began to set on the small town, casting a warm orange glow over the dusty streets and wooden buildings, Emily found herself standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into the unknown. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, with the truth about Jack's past slowly beginning to unravel like a spool of thread pulled from a worn sweater. She had always known that he was a man with secrets, But she had never imagined that his story would be so complex, so fraught with pain and regret. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw something there that gave her pause, a deep well of emotion that seemed to echo her own feelings. It was as if he understood her, truly understood her, in a way that no one else ever had. She felt a shiver run down her spine as he reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gentle, reassuring grasp. The warmth of his skin, the roughness of his calloused palms, and the gentle pressure of his fingers all combined to send a wave of comfort through her. The whole town seemed to be watching, their faces pressed up against the windows of the local diner, their eyes fixed on the couple standing in the center of the street. It was as if they knew that something momentous was happening, something that would change the course of their lives forever. Emily felt a flutter in her chest, a mix of excitement and fear, as she realized that she was standing at a crossroads, with the power to choose which path she would take. The smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the diner, mingling with the scent of smoke from the chimney of the nearby general store, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the breeze, all blending together to create a sense of community and warmth. As she looked up at Jack, she saw a man who was flawed, imperfect, and yet, somehow, perfectly suited to her. She saw a man who had been broken, but who was slowly, painstakingly, putting himself back together again. And she saw a man who loved her, truly loved her, with a depth and ferocity that she had never experienced before. The lines on his face, etched by the sun and the wind, seemed to tell a story of their own, a story of hardship and struggle, but also of resilience and determination. The question was, could she trust him? Could she believe that he was the answer to her prayers, the man who would stand by her side and support her, no matter what challenges lay ahead? It was a risk, she knew, a risk to open herself up to the possibility of hurt and rejection. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something there that gave her the courage to take that leap of faith. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. The words hung in the air, suspended like a challenge or a plea. "I know," he replied, his voice low and soothing, like a gentle stream meandering through the countryside. "But I'm here, Emily. I'm not going anywhere, I promise." As he spoke, he pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like a warm blanket. Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her, a sense of belonging that she had never known before. It was as if she had finally found her way home, to a place where she was loved and accepted, just as she was. The town around them seemed to fade into the background, the faces and buildings blurring together as Emily lost herself in the depths of Jack's eyes. She felt a sense of joy, of resolution, that she had never experienced before. It was as if all the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The stars began to twinkle in the night sky, like diamonds scattered across the velvet expanse, and the world seemed to slow down, as if it too were holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. As the night deepened, Emily knew that she had made her decision. She would trust Jack, trust him with her heart and her life, and as she did, she felt a sense of freedom, of release that she had never known before. She was no longer alone, no longer adrift in a world that seemed determined to pull her under. She was loved, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The sound of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the breeze filled the air, a soothing melody that seemed to match the beating of her heart as she leaned into Jack's chest, feeling the warmth of his body and the love that radiated from him like a beacon in the darkness.